Day 8. Complete darkness. Pedro Gonzalez claws at the concrete slab above his head. His fingernails are gone. Blood mixes with dust on his shredded hands. The air is thick, hot, suffocating. Each breath takes more effort than the last. He's been entombed in this coffin-sized space since the building collapsed. No food, a few drops of water from a leaking pipe, and the voices above ground. They've stopped searching. His hands find a small gap in the rubble. He pushes. The concrete shifts, just an inch. Then everything above him begins to move. Is this his escape? Or is he about to be crushed? This is the story of a man buried alive for 10 days beneath 8 tons of concrete and steel. Guatemala City, September 1996. When a poorly constructed apartment building pancaked during an earthquake, Pedro Gonzalez vanished into the rubble. What happens next defies every statistical probability of survival. Experts give victims 72 hours before dehydration kills them. Pedro had barely any water. No light, no room to move. But the true horror, he could hear rescuers walking above him, and they couldn't hear him scream. Pedro Gonzalez wasn't supposed to be in that building. The 24-year-old construction worker lived across the city with his wife Maria and their 6-month-old daughter. But that September afternoon, he was doing a favor for his brother-in-law, helping repair a crack in the wall of apartment 3B. The building was only 5 years old. Cheap construction. Locals called it the matchbox because the walls were so thin. Pedro was meticulous. Former colleagues describe him as cautious, methodical, the kind of guy who triple-checked safety harnesses. That day, he'd noticed something wrong with the building's foundation during his inspection. He told the superintendent the cracks weren't just cosmetic. They indicated structural failure. The superintendent dismissed him. It survived smaller quakes, he said. It'll be fine. At 2:47 p.m., Pedro was on the 3rd floor, spackling a wall. He was supposed to be home by 4. Maria had made his favorite meal, pepián. Their daughter had just started sleeping through the night. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. Then the ground moved. The earthquake measured 5.8 on the Richter scale. Not catastrophic. Not even the worst Guatemala had seen. But for the matchbox building, it was a death sentence. The tremor lasted 18 seconds. Pedro felt the floor drop. He lurched toward the doorway. Standard earthquake procedure. He almost made it. Almost. The ceiling came down first. Then the walls folded inward like paper. Floor collapsed onto floor. 3 stories compacted into one. The sound was deafening. Concrete grinding, steel twisting, glass exploding. Then silence. Dust hung in the air. And Pedro Gonzalez was gone, swallowed by 8 tons of rubble. Pedro woke up in absolute darkness. Not dim, not shadowy. The kind of black that makes you question if your eyes are even open. His right arm was pinned beneath a concrete slab. His legs bent at an unnatural angle. He tried to move. Couldn't. The space around him was smaller than a coffin, roughly 3 feet by 4 feet, less than 2 feet high. When he breathed in, the ceiling touched his face. Panic hit immediately. He screamed. Dust filled his lungs, triggering a coughing fit that made his ribs scream. Something was broken inside. He forced himself to stop, to think. Construction training kicked in. Assess the situation. His right arm had sensation. Good, not severed. His legs hurt, but he could wiggle his toes. The weight on his chest was a steel beam, but it had landed across another chunk of concrete, creating a small gap. That gap was the only reason he wasn't crushed flat. He listened. Above him, voices. Faint, but real. Rescuers. They were close. He opened his mouth to yell. That's when he felt it. His jaw wouldn't move properly. Broken or dislocated. His scream came out as a muffled groan. Above, the footsteps continued. They didn't pause. They didn't hear him. He tried again, louder, forcing air through his damaged jaw. The effort made him dizzy. The footsteps faded. Hour 12. They'd come back. They had to. But this was only the beginning. Day 2. The thirst started. Not mild discomfort. Primal, consuming thirst. His tongue swelled. Lips cracked. He'd read somewhere that humans die after 3 days without water. He had to find moisture. He turned his head, each movement agony, and listened. There. A sound. Drip. 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 Water. Somewhere to his left. He couldn't see it. Couldn't reach it. The sound mocked him. Hour 52. His broken jaw had one advantage. The swelling created gaps between his teeth. When dust settled on his face, moisture from his breath dampened it. He learned to let dust collect in his mouth. Let his saliva turn it to mud, then filter the tiny amount of moisture. Maybe half a teaspoon per hour. Enough to keep him alive, barely. Day 3. The dripping sound grew louder. A pipe was leaking. He shifted his body millimeter by millimeter, ignoring the white-hot pain in his ribs. 6 hours of micro-movements bought him 2 inches. His fingertips touched wetness. He angled his palm to create a tiny cup. A single drop collected, then another. He brought his hand to his mouth. The water tasted like rust and concrete. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever experienced. But hope came with a price. The voices above had stopped. He'd been counting them, tracking the search teams. Day 1, dozens of voices. Day 2, maybe 10. Day 3, 2. Day 4, none. The 72-hour window had closed. Rescue teams follow protocols. After 3 days, they shift from rescue to recovery. They were looking for bodies now, not survivors. Day 5. His mind started playing tricks. He saw his daughter's face in the darkness. Heard Maria calling his name. The hallucinations felt real. More real than the concrete coffin. He knew what this meant. Dehydration. Deterioration. Brain function declining. He had maybe 48 hours left. The tiny water drops weren't enough. That's when he noticed something. The concrete slab above his head had a crack. A hairline fracture. And every time he pushed against it, just slightly, it widened. Microscopic, but measurable. Then on day 5, everything changed. Day 6, 2:37 a.m. Pedro made a decision that would either save him or kill him. He'd been rationing his energy, staying still to conserve oxygen and water. But the rescuers weren't coming back. If he stayed here, he'd die slowly. His only chance was to dig. Not down. That was impossible. Not sideways. The walls were solid. Up. Through the crack in the concrete slab above him, he positioned his left hand against the crack. Pushed. The slab was easily 300 pounds, probably more. It didn't budge. He pushed harder. Pain shot through his arm. His vision went white, or would have if there was any light. He kept pushing. A chunk of concrete, smaller than his thumb, broke free. One piece. He'd been pushing for an hour. The math was impossible. The slab was 6 inches thick. At this rate, he'd need weeks. He didn't have days. Day 7, his fingers were destroyed. The concrete had stripped away skin, then flesh. He could feel bones scraping against stone. But the crack was wider now. Maybe half an inch. He could fit his whole hand through it. He reached up into the gap, trying to find what was above this slab. His fingers touched something soft. Fabric. He pulled. It didn't move. He pulled harder. The fabric tore. A piece fell through the crack onto his face. A shirt. Someone else's shirt. He was touching a body. The psychological weight hit harder than the concrete. He wasn't just trapped. He was in a mass grave. How many bodies were above him? How many people had died in this collapse? Was anyone even looking anymore? Day 8, delirium set in. He couldn't tell if he was awake or dreaming. Time became meaningless. But some animal part of his brain kept his hands moving, scraping, digging. He'd created a hole now, roughly the size of a dinner plate. He could fit his arm through, shoulder deep. But the effort was killing him. Each movement required energy he didn't have. His water source had dried up. The pipe had stopped dripping. His lips were bleeding. His tongue felt like leather. He had 2 choices. Stop digging and die slowly from dehydration. Or keep digging and risk triggering a secondary collapse that would crush him instantly. Day 9. Hour 2:12. Pedro pushed his entire arm through the hole. His hand emerged into a space, another gap in the rubble. This one felt bigger. He explored it with his fingers. The space was maybe a foot high, extending several feet in one direction. If he could widen the hole, if he could fit through. He pulled his arm back and began attacking the concrete with renewed fury. Every survival instinct screamed at him to keep going. Hour 2:24. The hole was now the size of a basketball, but his body was failing. He'd lost at least 30 pounds. His muscles barely responded. Getting through the hole would require pulling his entire body weight upward with his destroyed hands. He didn't know if he had the strength. He thought of Maria, of his daughter, who would grow up without him, of dying alone in the darkness, just feet from a larger space. Not acceptable. What happened next would determine if he lived or died. Day 10. 6:15 a.m. Pedro positioned himself beneath the hole he'd created. He reached up with both arms, gripped the edges. The pain was blinding, and pulled. His head entered the gap. Concrete scraped against his skull. The hole was too small. He was stuck. He couldn't move forward or backward. Panic clawed at his chest. He twisted his shoulders, feeling something tear in his collarbone. His left shoulder dislocated. The sickening pop echoed in the confined space. But his body narrowed. He pushed with his feet. Nothing to push against. He was suspended, wedged in concrete. He shifted his weight, felt himself slide upward an inch. Then another. His chest was through. His ribs screamed. One more push. His hips caught. He wasn't going to make it. He relaxed his body completely. Exhaled every bit of air in his lungs, making himself as small as possible. Then he pulled with everything he had left. Something gave way. He fell forward into the larger space, gasping. This chamber was bigger. He could sit up, and there was light, not sunlight. A sliver of gray. Somewhere above, maybe 10 feet up, was an opening to the outside world. He could see shadows moving. Hear voices, he tried to yell. Nothing came out but a rasp. His vocal cords were destroyed. He looked around desperately. His hand found a piece of rebar loose in the rubble. He grabbed it and began banging it against a steel beam. 3 hits. Pause. 3 hits. Pause. The SOS pattern. Above, the voices stopped. Someone said, "Wait, do you hear that?" The rescue took 4 more hours. They had to stabilize the rubble before they could extract him. When they finally pulled Pedro Gonzalez into daylight on September 15, 1996, 238 hours after the collapse, he weighed 103 pounds. He'd lost 43 pounds. His hands were skeletal. His jaw was wired shut by swelling and blood. One rescuer said his eyes looked like holes into nothing. His first word, whispered through broken teeth. Maria. Against odds calculated later at less than 0.01%, he had done the impossible. He was the last survivor pulled from the Guatemala City collapse. The only person found alive after day 3, the man who dug himself out of his own grave. Pedro spent 7 weeks in hospital. Both hands required reconstructive surgery. He regained 60% function. His jaw was wired shut for 6 weeks. The dislocated shoulder healed, but never fully. He lost hearing in his left ear from the constant proximity to concrete. But he lived. The psychological scars ran deeper. He developed severe claustrophobia. Couldn't ride elevators or sleep in closed rooms. Night terrors plagued him for years. But he refused therapy initially, telling reporters, "I survived 10 days in hell. I can survive this." Eventually, he did seek help. PTSD treatment, exposure therapy. Slowly, he reclaimed his life. Medical experts who studied his case were baffled. Dr. Helena Ruiz, who treated him, stated, "By every metric, he should have died by day 4. The amount of water he collected, we estimated less than 200 milliliters total over 10 days, shouldn't have sustained him." His survival rewrote our understanding of human endurance limits. The Guatemala City collapse killed 47 people. Pedro's survival led to strict building code reforms in Central America. The superintendent who dismissed his warnings faced criminal charges. The Matchbox building became a case study in engineering schools worldwide. what not to do. Pedro returned to construction work 3 years later. He specialized in earthquake retrofitting, making buildings safer. He's personally inspected over 300 structures, preventing countless deaths. When asked why he went back to the job that nearly killed him, he said, "I know what bad construction looks like. I know what it feels like. I can't let it happen to someone else's family." Today, Pedro is 52 years old. He's a grandfather. He speaks at disaster preparedness conferences, teaching people survival techniques. The concrete dust never fully left his lungs. Doctors find traces in every scan, a permanent reminder of his 10 days underground. His most powerful message? In that darkness, I learned something. The human body will quit long before the human spirit. Your mind will tell you it's over. Your body will beg you to stop. But there's something deeper. Something that doesn't know how to surrender. That's what saved me. Not luck, not miracle. Just the refusal to accept the grave I was in. Remember that crack in the concrete from the beginning? That microscopic fracture that became his escape route? Engineers later determined it was caused by Pedro's initial impact when the building collapsed. His own body, falling through the floors, created the flaw that would eventually save his life. Sometimes, the thing that breaks you carries the seed of your salvation. You just have to be willing to dig for it.